Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about self-examination. In book 38 of Ihya-Ulum-Uddin, Ghazali chooses to study self as the object of study. Its title read on vigilance and self-examination. In Arabic terms, muraqaba and muhasaba. In the last video we looked at muraqaba. In this video we are going to see what the great sage has to say about muhasaba or self-examination. First of all, we need to get clear about the difference between vigilance and self-examination. Vigilance is the check we put on our intention before committing any act, whereas self-examination is the reflection on past acts. Vigilance comes before action, whereas self-examination comes after action. Ghazali also follows this chronology. He discusses self-examination after covering vigilance. He first gives justification for self-examination. Why should we examine this cunning thing called self? Why should we examine ourselves? He gives us the example of merchants to give the answer. In their mundane concerns, the merchants of this world act in similar fashion with their associates at the end of every year, month, or day. They are fearful of omitting anything of the world that might be a boon to them. If that were to happen to them, they would have only a few days left to rectify the balance. So how can a reasonable man fail to examine his soul about what relates to the danger of eternal damnation or salvation? He continues, just as he scrutinizes the mundane accounting of every measure and weight, so he records entries for gains and losses in order to preclude cheating. Thus, he must guard against the deceit and cunning of the soul, for it is deceptive, dubious, and cunning. Therefore, let him first ask the soul to rectify the response to everything uttered in the course of his stay, and let him make his soul liable for what account another will own at the high plateau of the resurrection. A business that does not examine its ledgers at the end of the year is forced to examine it at the end of the year by the government. But in any case, every merchant has a self-interest in examining his merchandise. Otherwise, he would never know how much profit or loss he had made, how much money has been stolen, if any. On the other hand, if any merchant deliberately avoids this examination, then the government authorities whose favors he has enjoyed throughout the year smell something vicious and force the examination. If we are so concerned about the accounting of money matters, says Ghazali, why are we not more concerned about the self or the soul? There are more questions asked about money in our society than about the self, because sadly, the self is considered merely as a concept to be consumed and analyzed in the classroom. But Ghazali wants us to shake off this illusion because he says the soul is a debtor whose debts must be paid in full, some of them in reparation and security, some in restitution in mind, and some by punishment. So the soul is not a creditor that can enjoy in peace and others pay tributes to him. A creditor is a person who can demand something with pride, whereas a debtor is always humbled by the obligations designated by the debtor. Ghazali always talks about the soul as a debtor of obligations. We come into this world with a debt of some essential duties that must be duly paid. The soul as a debtor is a perfect condition to explain its condition because self-examination is only done by those who are always skeptical of the goodness or sufficiency of their actions, which brings virtuous humility as well, and by those who consider each moment demanding some moral duty to be performed. They are always looking back on their shoulders to see that they did not leave anyone hurt, or worse, they did not act in a manner that questioned their own humanity. This is why Ghazali says that everything must be examined, his options, ideas, thoughts, standing, sitting, eating, drinking, and sleeping, even his silence. For what reason was he silent, and why was he at rest? Remind yourself of the Socratic claim, unreflective life is not worth living. It is not a soft, leisurely reflection that one does on vacation once a year on a riverside. It is a constant state of mind for the virtuous. There is nothing mundane for a self-examining pious individual. Every act, as Ghazali says, even silence brings with it some intention, and that is the center of inquiry. In self-vigilance, Ghazali talks about the three fundamental questions that should precede every act. Why did I do it? How did I do it? For whom did I do it? All three of them are related to intentions. But what is the main reason for the ruin of the soul? He says that the soul is let loose by negligence. Neglecting the acts of the soul means that we let it get accustomed to temptations. We allow it to flourish through our desires, saying that we would not do it next time. Just as we let the soul get acquainted with the fulfillment of its vicious desires, we also force ourselves into the habit of doing it, and then another bad habit is regretting it later. The action and its regret become our habit. Such a vicious cycle commences with our negligence in self-examination. Just as we keep a check on our accountants so that they do not slip any money under the table, we have to keep a strict eye on ourselves who always want to slip away into the world of pleasures. Ghazali does not just lecture us upon mere self-examination, he also provides the proper way of doing it. He says, if you are among the steadfast Murabitun who are vigilant, self-examining, then it behoves you to study the states of those men and women who are striving, in order to spur your enthusiasm and increase your aspiration. Beware of looking to your contemporaries. Most people on earth you heed lead away from the path of God. He draws our attention to the fact with a very heart that our contemporaries do not follow the high standards of virtue that our forefathers used to follow. And this is Ghazali writing in his time. Which is why we have to focus on hearing and reading about the ancients rather than observation. He gives many examples in his book of the steadfast people. To give you one example, he narrates the story of Dawood al-Tai. Muhammad bin Bashar once saw Dawood al-Tai eating unsalted bread for breakfast. He said to him, "What if you ate with salt?" Dawood replied, "My soul has been urging me for a year to eat salt." But Dawood tasted no more salt as long as he lived. Ghazali's book is filled with hundreds of examples of these kind, both men and women included. Reading it is an experience in itself. He is a remarkable teacher. He explains what needs to be done and then himself explains with real life examples in the book so that no one has any excuses that these things cannot be done by a human. Knowing the fact that even after so many examples there would be many souls who would not pay heed to their own self, he also suggests that we need to punish ourselves. And the best way to punish ourselves is to deny the self its desires. Denial can only be exercised by a strong mind because it requires a lot of strength to get rid of a habit created by desire. Just like Dawood al-Tai, try not to eat salt for a day, or more for a week, let's say. It is physically and psychologically challenging. But since this act is done with a higher purpose, what we achieve through it is worth much more than what we give up. Ghazali says, "O soul, if a servant of yours, nay, a brother, should confront you with something you dislike, what anger and loathing would you harbor for him?" What we gain through self-denial is primarily a distance from the desires that are morally questionable, or as Ghazali would say, the wrath of God. We cannot tolerate negation. We cannot tolerate even if someone touches us by mistake. We cannot tolerate if someone says something stupid. We cannot tolerate criticism. We cannot actually tolerate ourselves. Our pride blinds us. We consider our ignorance to be our knowledge and our doom to be our pride. I leave you now with Ghazali's words. Think about them. Woe unto you, O soul, how great your ignorance is. You claim wisdom, acuity, and cleverness, but you are more stupid and foolish than other people. Thank you, everyone.